Well, the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution has accused the Judicial Service Commission of acting unlawfully. CASAC's executive director claims the body went beyond its mandate in recent interviews for the Constitutional Court and wants the process declared unlawful. We're joined by the organization's Lawson Naidu. Mr. Naidu, good evening to you and thank you so much for your time tonight. Firstly, what did you find to be wrong with the interview process?
Good evening, Kathy, and thank you very much. In terms of the Constitution, the Judicial Service Commission is mandated to appoint or recommend candidates for appointments to the higher courts, from the High Court to the Supreme Court of Appeal and the Constitutional Court. And in doing so, the JSC must act in an independent and impartial manner, and its questioning of candidates should be to determine whether they are appropriately qualified and whether they are fit and proper to hold judicial office. In this round of interviews, what we found was that many of the questions that were directed at some of the candidates went beyond the bounds of determining their fitness or propriety and descended into political attacks on judges using allegations that were unfounded or unproven, which were contested by the judges. And in those circumstances, if allegations are going to be put to candidates, they should be forewarned so that they can prepare for that. In addition, some of the commissioners tackled judges on litigational cases where those commissioners themselves were participants. And this was entirely not allowed in terms of the process. And the chairperson of the JSC, the Chief Justice, should have ruled many of those questions out of order. And we felt that this then resulted in an unfair interview process, and the recommendation that the JSC has made to the President of a short list of five candidates to fill 2 vacancies should indeed be set aside by the courts, and the process should be rerun.
So I want to go back to some of what came out of those interviews and some of the moments that you might actually be pointing us to, just to refresh our listeners, our viewers' memory.
Well, it started off, as we explained in our court papers, with Commissioner Naren Singh relaying questions that were submitted to the JSC from members of the public. These questions should have been scrutinized by the Commission beforehand and should not have been permitted to be asked because they were based on unfounded allegations of politically charged questioning that have no place in a JSC interview process. We then had the issues of Commissioner Malema raising political issues with candidate Judge Daya Pillay, and then that was then followed up by the Chief Justice himself raising an issue of a conversation that he had with Mr. Pravin Gordhan when he was the Minister of Finance. And the Chief Justice seemed to suggest that Mr. Gordhan sought the meeting purely for the purposes of trying to lobby him, when it was clear from both Mr. Mokoeng's version, Chief Justice Mokoeng's version, and Mr. Gordhan's version, that there was a legitimate reason for the meeting, and to suggest that that meeting was improper certainly put the candidate in a bad light. And Mr. Malema then proclaimed very openly that he considered Judge Pillay to be nothing but a political activist, and that he would argue that point in the closed session. Well, that does not demonstrate that Mr. Malema came to the JSC interviews with an open mind, as he is required in terms of his role as a commissioner. And therefore, we felt that the process was fatally flawed because there were many other examples similar to those in the course of those interviews.
Lawson, I'm going to ask you just to pause it there for a moment, and I'm actually going to take you to that particular clip that Lawson is referencing there.
I'm going to argue in this in a closed session, that you are nothing but a political activist. You are no judge and you deserve no high office. If anything, you're also factional and belong to Pravin's faction, and you are pursuing factional battles using the bench. Will I be fair in that criticism?
No, you won't. For your information, Mr. Malema, I refuse leave to appeal in the Hanekom matter. It went to the Supreme Court of Appeal, who refused the petition. It went to the Constitutional Court, and the Chief Justice also was party to the decision refusing leave to appeal. So if I misbehaved in any way, there was every opportunity for the court sitting over me to call me to order.
Of course, Mr. Naidu, the difficulty here is that even though you may have raised issues with some of the commissioners who were conducting these interviews, the decision over who ultimately becomes the Chief Justice does not rest solely with one person. There are deliberations that the JSC has over different candidates.
Indeed, and we've asked the Judicial Service Commission for the record of those deliberations to determine whether they applied an open mind to the process or not. The JSC has refused to give us those reasons, unlawfully so, because they are legally bound to disclose those reasons and to make them public. And we repeat the request for those reasons in our papers, because they need to demonstrate that they evaluated all of the candidates on the basis of objective criteria, and not, as Mr. Malema sought to do in that instance, where if there is a complaint against a judge, there are processes that need to be followed to lay those complaints. The interviews for the Judicial Service Commission are not the platform for those issues or grudges to be raised and for political issues to be elevated in those interviews.
Would it not be unprecedented for whether it's the meeting records or even transcripts of that meeting to be made public, as, you know, it's usually a process that is closed off in as far as those deliberations are concerned? So by way of this court application, will you be effectively unveiling a process that has been largely closed off to the public?
Well, the courts have ruled previously that the record of deliberations need to be made public. This was in the matter of a case some years ago when Mr. Jeremy Gauntlet was interviewed for a position in the High Court, I recall at the time, and the court ruled that the record needed to be made public. So there is legal precedent, which is why we're saying that the JSC is under a legal obligation to make that record available, so that we can properly understand whether the JSC did in fact carry out its constitutional duty or not. In the interim,
by way of this court challenge, do you think it would in any way affect the duty of the president to appoint a constitutional court judge, at least until the court process is concluded? Do you think it will interfere with that process at all?
Well, you know, that is obviously a matter for the president to determine. We certainly hope that the matter will be dealt with on an expedited basis by the court, and we have pointed out the importance of resolving this issue as soon as possible in our application to the Gauteng High Court, and we trust that the court will deal with it with the urgency it requires, because, you know, one doesn't want to hobble the functioning of the court, but on the other hand, we cannot simply ignore a JSC process that seems so apparently unlawful, unfair on the candidates, and unfair on the people of South Africa, who rely on an independent judiciary to uphold the constitutional democracy that we have. If the JSC is allowed to behave in the manner in which it did, it undermines the integrity and the independence of the judges, and that is something that I do not think we should be tolerating.
All right, let's leave it there for tonight. Executive Director of CASAC, Lawson Naidu. So they're bringing a court application. This is against those interviews held by the JSC to appoint a new constitutional court judge. At least they want the process reviewed, saying that it has been unfair towards certain candidates.